Should drivers be charged by the mile in order to fight climate change? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need to get your calls in now. Now, ministers have said they will block any attempts to launch a pay-as-you-drive tax after Sadiq Khan denied reports that he was planning such a scheme. He was on the cover of 2 Sunday papers yesterday. Sadiq Khan put out a tweet saying, "I have no intention of doing this at all." The London mayor was forced to speak out, calling the claims nonsense, despite the policy being discussed in his 2018 transport strategy. A pay-as-you-drive tax could see motorists incur charges based on the length of their journeys, the amount of congestion and the emission levels every time they get behind the wheel. Grace, what do you make of this idea? A lot of people are saying that it is fairer to do a pay as you drive than what we have at the moment, where everybody's paying a flat fee.
Yeah.
The other point I will make just before we launch into this is £25 billion goes into the Treasury because of the taxes, not just our car taxes, but fuel duty.
Yeah.
If we're all starting to drive electric cars, they're going to have to find 25 billion quid from somewhere.
Look, I think the first thing that I want to say before we really launch into this topic is that you often see stories like this coming out where it says, you know, the government wants to introduce 15-minute cities, the government wants to charge you X amount to drive Y amount, or they're not going to allow you to leave your homes. And then, you know, someone like Sadiq Khan is forced to come out and say, I'm not going to do this. And as soon as you say, I'm not going to do this, people look at that and they think, oh, well, you know, that's a politician, I don't believe them. So it's been a really successful way of people who oppose any attempt to decarbonise the economy of saying, the government want you, the little person, the poor person, to pay the cost of this transition, and they want to keep you trapped in your homes and all these sorts of kind of scary things. And actually, this isn't something that the government is looking at. It's not something that Sadiq Khan is looking at. So we just need to make that very, very clear. The second point I want to make is that the reason we've ended up in this situation is that decarbonisation is supposed to be something that we do as a society. We've got 100 companies across the world who are responsible for 70% of emissions. People who are wealthier are disproportionately responsible for a huge amount of carbon emissions, and those who are poorer are not. So the costs of transitioning should be borne by those most able to bear it, those who emit the most, those who are most responsible for this phenomenon. And the way that we go towards a greener economy should be shared equally. We need to invest in making sure that the way we produce energy is different, so that when you turn on a light switch, it comes from a green source, or it's easier for you to get around using public transport. That requires a change in the way we think as a society, the way we do economic activity, not just individuals being penalised for the things they need to get by.
So penalising individuals for having or needing to drive their cars, perhaps, if you turn to a charge per mile. Ali, what do you think?
Well, look, on the charge per mile thing, I think if it does come in, it is going to be in addition to all the other taxes that are already being paid by drivers, which I think is wrong and unjust. If a pay per mile system comes in and it replaces all other vehicle tax, is fine, because I have a car, I live in inner London, I park my car, an extortionate amount of money I spend parking underground because my last car got nicked and the previous one had its roof slashed twice. Welcome to Sadiq Khan's London, by the way. And so I pay for this.
Here.
I drive it.
But it's all right. You put it in there.
It is what it is. But the point is this. I drive my car once a month to go to the countryside because I want to breathe some fresh air and actually...
might get more fresh air with ULEZ.
Fresh air in London.
Go on, I've got to keep you brief. Go on.
No, but the point is, I'm fine with it if it replaces all the other taxes.
All right. Let's bring in Sylvia Barrett, Director of Policy and Research at the Campaign for Better Transport. Sylvia, thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Pay per mile. You've heard there from Ali. If it's going to replace all other taxes, so we don't have road tax anymore, we don't have fuel duty, and we can go to pay per mile, would that be a good idea?
Yes, the first thing to make clear is that there are two different options for pay per mile. One, it can be applied at the national level as a replacement for fuel duty and VD and other vehicle taxes as a way to raise revenue by the Treasury. Secondly, it could be implemented at the London level as a replacement for congestion charge and ULEZ, and that would be as a way to make it fairer for drivers. So you're not charged this lump sum per day for congestion charge or ULEZ or both, but you would be paying depending on the distance that you're driving, which is fairer if you're driving a shorter distance.
So let's focus then on the second part. So in congested cities, for example, instead of having something like ULEZ and the congestion charge, which a lot of people had objected to, I remember the objections of the congestion charge when it first came in, then would it be a fairer way to charge people, drive per mile charging in congestion cities? How would it actually work? So the people driving more would pay higher rates? Is that how it would work?
Yes, we at the Campaign for Better Transport and other environmental charities who believe that's a much fairer way of charging for clean air and for congestion purposes and for carbon reduction emissions as well. So that you would be charged per mile. There might be a starting charge, much as when you get into a taxi, there's a starting charge, and then you pay per mile based on and based on perhaps your vehicle emissions, so that if you're driving a cleaner vehicle, you wouldn't be paying, you'd be paying much less than if you're driving a much dirtier vehicle.
Okay.
In London, it could be on a zonal basis, so that if you're in the current congestion charge zone, you'll be paying more per mile than if you are in outer London. This then takes into account the availability of alternatives that you have.
Okay. Very interesting points. You wanted to...
I think that's an important point because, you could say it's fairer to charge people more based on the length of time that they're driving. The issue is, of course, is that wealthier people tend to live in central London. They're going to have to drive less because it's easier for them to get to the place they need to go. Poorer people tend to be forced out further and further and further, and that means they end up paying more for transport. So, arguably, it would actually be fairer to make sure that this system was linked to income in some way. Although, personally, I think it's much better to focus on making sure that there are universally available forms of public transport for everyone.
Okay. Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us. Campaign for Better Transport. Some really interesting thoughts there. Let's speak to you at home. Rowena in Surrey. Good afternoon, Rowena. What do you think? Charging people for how much they drive rather than charging everybody the same amount?
I think that's an extremely good idea. I think that the people who use the roads most, it might make them think about their journeys. And the people like me, last year I only drove 500 miles, would have a much fairer deal. So the people who are driving the most are using and causing wear and tear and pollution. So, of course, it's much fairer to do it by miles. But I was advised by my insurance company when I mentioned I hoped I might get a reduction in my insurance, that it would go against me for driving less miles.
Yes, if you're driving fewer miles, the insurer assumes that perhaps you're not as confident a driver, you don't have as much experience. The more miles you tell them you drive, the fewer accidents they think that you're going to have. Rowena, thank you for that.
I was just thinking, Rowena, sorry, I was thinking, it came to my mind live on air, which doesn't normally happen. My brain doesn't normally work that fast. But I was just thinking, on that basis, and I agree with you that we should pay per mile. However, I was just thinking, on that basis, then, if you don't have kids to go to school, should you pay for that? If you don't use the NHS, should you pay for that? So there is a collective element that we have when it comes to taxes and things. Okay. And this would actually go against it.
You're starting to sound an awful lot like me, to be honest. That's what I would have said. Universally available services that we all collectively pay for as the cornerstone of social democracy.
Yeah, but I was really interested in what we heard from Sylvia there, the idea that you would be charged for where you're driving. So if you want to drive into the centre of town, that's going to cost you a little bit more because you are creating congestion in the centre of town. But if you want to drive outside in the countryside, you'll be paying a lot less. Pam in Edinburgh, good afternoon. What are your thoughts on this? Pay per mile?
No, not at all. I think it's wrong.
Why not?
My partner is a lorry driver, and in effect, everything that comes into the country, whether it be train, plane, boat, in effect, ends up on the back of a lorry.
Yes.
They do hundreds of thousands of miles, kilometres every year. How is it going to affect them?
Well,
they will put their prices up. The customers will then have to pay more. We go shopping. The cost of living crisis is bad enough as it is. And then it will go down to Joe Public. We will be the ones who are footing all of this.
OK, Pam, you make a good point. I'll leave it there. Pam makes a good point. I mean, pretty much, remember when the whole lorry driver crisis happened, that everything we sort of touch almost has been on the back of the lorry at some point. But perhaps for businesses, that would be different. And already in the EU, they are creating schemes where lorries driving for longer distances are paying higher rate. So perhaps it's something that we do need to think about.
Maybe, but you need to take people with you. Look at the revolt in Netherlands, Germany, France on the petrol protests. You need to take people with you.
Okay. All right. Well, that's it for today. Thank you so much to Ali and Grace. They've been brilliant.